So, 2023 has been fantastic for pixel art games, with a whole bunch of beautiful ones, with the focus being on visuals, both of the modern high-bit pixel art, as well as excellently done throwback 8 and 16-bit looks. Hello indie game fans, my name is Clement and I love pixel art, so let's begin with Vengeful Guardian Moonrider, a game which would not be out of place on the Sega Genesis and comes to us from Brazilian developer Joy Masher, who is known for this type of pixel art. Indie Smash Bros. Freemakers is made by people that love the genre in a way that perhaps Nintendo doesn't love them back, so lucky for us, their considerable talents are now applied to this game, with the developers very carefully adding characters, features and modes through early access since the start of the year, with pixel art being the perfect medium for the game. Indonesian-made A Space for the Unbound is an emotional experience about teenagers at the end of the world, giving off vibes of Your Name or Weathering with You, with the depiction of late 90s rural Indonesia seeming to be rather authentic as well. A lot of people had the opinion that Pizza Tower was robbed for Best Debut Indie Games at the Game Awards, but then again, I suppose don't put too much weight on fancy award shows and such, and while I wouldn't exactly say the pixel art in this is beautiful, it sure is a look and has some unique, exaggerated facial animations. This brings us to the end of January, so here's a message from today's sponsor in Sandwalkers, a gorgeous upcoming pixel art roguelike RPG from the developers that made Legend of Keepers: Career of a Dungeon Master, looking to replicate the success of that with a new spin on the idea. This has you leading a caravan of heroes, attempting to cross hostile environments to find a suitable location to plant a new tree city that will serve as the refuge for future generations. There are all sorts of monsters, pirates and bandits in the wasteland which you need to overcome, with survival management elements in between the turn-based battles, such as ensuring that you have enough food supplies. There's diplomacy between tribes that you will participate in, having to make critical decisions, and of course, if you do fall in combat, there is meta progression and carryover through the passing down of knowledge, all with the ultimate goal of reviving the Mother Tree, having some of the most amazing pixel art. February was a smaller month for pixel art games and releases in general, which was due to the Steam Next Festival, but among them is Elder Ren, a 2D Souls-like Metroidvania that looks cool, having an interesting grappling hook mechanic, as well as gen bosses. A smaller game that you might not be aware of is Other War, a tower defense title with bullet hell elements, having simple but crisp, effective pixel art, and is something for indie game developers to take inspiration from if you want your games to look good. The platform fighter Rivals of Aether has had a number of spin-offs, one of which is Dungeons of Aether, a turn-based RPG with an interesting combat system, where I just want to highlight how beautiful this looks both in the overworld with the chibi characters, as well as in the battle interface. Another example of simple but effective pixel art is Max Monster, a turn-based Japanese-style RPG that has Undertale vibes, in which you play as a near-invincible monster that has to protect a little girl that can end the world if she cries, with clean, crisp pixel art as well. On the more minimalist end of things is Boneraiser Minions, a Vampire Survivors style title, but with a twist since you play as a necromancer and summon minions to do your bidding instead, sporting this developer's signature pixel art style and colour scheme. An amazing tactical roguelite is The Last Spell, one that has been described as Final Fantasy Tactics meets Diablo and Dynasty Warriors, in which you can cleave through hordes of enemies, with the pixel art certainly being a highlight. Vernal Age has an interesting pixel art look which I'm not totally on board with, since I do prefer characters with outlines as compared to without, but it's an all-action Metroidvania that's pretty interesting. Mr. Saito is from the developer of Rakuen, and similarly, is an emotional narrative title but with a twist for the weird, in which you play as a Japanese salaryman who is spirited away to a strange world, with the characters looking cute and having some amazingly detailed backgrounds and cutscenes. This next title underwent one of the most astonishing glam-ups since its Kickstarter campaign, in which the pixel art Metroidvania 9 Years of Shadows looks amazing, and the developers have rolled that momentum into their next game, Mariachi Legends, which you can find in my video on upcoming pixel art games of 2024. Lunak seems like a game from another age in which the cinematic platformer is a throwback to games like Another World, Flashback, and even the early Prince of Persia games, having a minimalist but effective pixel art style, although I don't think it has done gangbusters in terms of sales. The roguelite defense title War World has a very compelling gameplay loop of mining for resources and then purchasing upgrades for your Robo Spider so that you can shoot at waves of enemies, being another example of the effectiveness of pixel art. One of the best looking indie games of the year is Hunt the Night, which, like 9 Years of Shadows, had a huge visual upgrade as compared to its Kickstarter, in which this dark fantasy action-adventure game is pretty underrated, so do check it out. This is not an indie game per se, but The Mage Seeker, a League of Legends story, comes to us from developer Digital Sun, who made Moonlighter, and similarly has an awesome pixel art look, with Riot's strategy of using third-party developers and the League IP to make other games really paying off. The monster taming RPG Cassette Beasts combines Pokemon and Digimon, in which you can fuse any two monsters to get a new one, and with 141 base monsters means 19,881 possible combinations, in which I do like the use of pixel art here. We don't get very many traditional turn-based roguelikes, let alone ones that look as good as Dungeon Drafters, which is a mystery dungeon-like turn-based, grid-based title in which cards are magic, so you have to line up clever combos and be aware of positioning, and looks great.
Heroes fighting villains, saving the world. That's a good one.
The versatility of pixel art is shown in full force in Greed Ventori, one that has gorgeous cutscenes, but that is combined with grotesque and horrific enemies in-game, in which this roguelite RPG has you using your mouse cursor to deflect enemy attacks, for example, and is very unique. This next title is a real throwback, since Bat Boy is inspired by Mega Man, having a similar boss structure and abilities that you can get, with it nailing the 8-bit look, kind of like how Shovel Knight did it. I believe this next game is from a solo developer, which is very impressive, and even though I really do not like the title named Return, I think that there's something to this Metroidvania, aided of course by the minimalist but effective pixel art and use of colours. Renowned pixel artist Hank Nieborg worked on Tiny Thor, and I have to say, you can see the similarities between this and his work, being a classic action platformer that would not be out of place on the Genesis, having visuals to match. Here's an interesting entry in Kingdom 80s, a spin-off of the side-scrolling action strategy series, but somehow, instead of a fantasy world with monsters, it is set in a 1980s inspired small town, having you ride around on bicycles instead of horses, and looks good as well. Another example of simple but effective pixel art is Shogun Showdown, a roguelite deck builder in which movement and positioning matters, having elements from Into the Breach, and is relatively underrated, all things considered. Dave the Diver is not an indie game, but I do want to give it a mention since it mixes pixel art with 3D, but the restaurant area as well as cutscenes are really amazingly done. Another underrated indie game of the year is Gravity Circuit, an action platformer that is also Mega Man-like in nature, with crisp pixel art and a very interesting use of colour that is worth a study. This next title is one of the best roguelites of the year, in which the co-op-focused Ember Knight mazes in both the action and visuals, having rather high-fidelity pixel art which looks amazing. I still cannot pronounce this title, but I really like the chibi pixel art of The Knights of the Cross, a story-driven deck builder RPG that looks like it might have gacha elements, but in fact does not have microtransactions, and how I would love to see a tactics or strategy game with pixel art like this. A game 9 years in the making is Doomsday Hunters, a neat isometric action roguelite in which you can jump with a bunch of weird and interesting enemies and characters, as well as a ton of stuff in the codex, aided of course by the pixel art. Developer Lazy Bear Games is known for their pixel art at this point, with games like Punch Club and Graveyard Keeper, so it is no surprise that Punch Club 2 Fast Forward looks good, with the developer also working on a new game, which you can find in my video on upcoming pixel art games of 2024. Now this title is not new, being a 17-year-old game that just got a Steam release, but I just wanted to mention Yggdra Union anyway, since this tactical RPG originally launched on the Game Boy Advance, which was a handheld that made me fall in love with pixel art all those many years ago. So if any indie devs are watching, make your game look like this please. Another not-so-indie title is Double Dragon Gaiden Rise of the Dragons due to the IP, but it was made by Singaporean indie developer Secret Base, which has a similar look to their roguelite horror beat-em-up Streets of Red and looks good as well. Settle Moon is an interesting idle game in which you're developing a settlement for adventurers, being another example of minimalist but great pixel art. The roguelite Mega Man-like 30XX is the sequel to 20XX, ditching the hand-drawn look for pixel art, and I think that it looks amazing, although unfortunately, at least on Steam, I don't think it's selling as well as the original. Here's an interesting title in terms of visuals, since Black Skylands is a top-down action-adventure crafting game in which top-down pixel art is difficult to make beautiful, but I think it's commendable here, being an interesting game as well, although they did strip out some of the systems during early access. A relatively unknown title that looks good is Cantata, a grand tactics title of warring factions on an alien planet and has interesting ideas. Here's the remaster of a 10-year-old game in Hammerwatch Anniversary Edition, which looks much better than the original and even has significant gameplay tweaks and new content, so if you love the original, perhaps check it out. We also had the release of Hammerwatch 2, the sequel to Hammerwatch, and allows you to explore the lands beyond the dungeons of Castle Hammerwatch and has a good look as well. Of course, Blasphemous 2 will feature in a video like this, since the original Blasphemous is one of the best looking pixel art games ever, with the sequel luckily not switching the art style, so it continues to look amazing, although there's a lack of the giant monstrous bosses of the first game in favour of more humanoid sized and shaped bosses, so it was a little bit of a bummer. The Steam release of Frogasso and Friends is of note, primarily because it showcases the timelessness of well-done pixels, since this game, if you can believe it, is from 2010, but yet still holds up visually in my opinion. The Chrono Trigger-like Sea of Stars was high up on my watch list of pixel art games of 2023, and I'm happy to report that it does not disappoint, both in terms of the game and visuals, so for a real nostalgia hit with modern sheen and polish, give this game a go. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that pixel art might be easier to do in fighting games, since it is limited to character sprites and level backgrounds, so if you have a fixed number, say 8 levels, that means 8 pieces of art to get done, with the Brazilian fighting game Pocket Bravery being great to play as well and is for fans of the genre. I'm a fan of the work of developer Yo, with his latest Fading Afternoon being of note, a Yakuza life sim beat-em-up with interesting themes and a throwback look that simply works. The pixel art RPG Wandering Sword allows you to choose either turn-based or real-time combat, which is an interesting choice, with the Chinese wuxia or cultivation theme being well executed and looks awesome. Here's a hidden gem that you might not know about, since Sagres comes to us from a Korean developer and is relatively underrated, being an open-world sailing simulation title in which you are free to explore, having simple but very effective pixel art as well. cozy games and pixel art go hand in hand. Think Stardew Valley for example, with the latest example being Moonstone Island, one that adds monster taming elements and deck building combat to the formula and is good. I've had my eye on Lunar Lux for quite a while since this pixel art title has Mega Man Battle Network inspiration, also nailing the throwback look. Developer D-Pad Studio is known for their pixel art, see Owlboy for example, in which Savant Ascent Remakes has an interesting development history, starting off as a remaster of a 10-year-old game, but through development, they were tweaking and adding new content until it became more of a sequel and is an interesting twin-stick shooter with quite the challenge. Dot Age is one of my favourite indie games of the year since this roguelite survival strategy title makes you think, and while the pixel art doesn't knock me over, zoomed out the game looks very impressive and is another example of the effectiveness of pixel art, especially for indie game developers. Wargroove 2 pretty much looks like the original Wargroove, so there's nothing too crazy here, but it still looks great. I think that the choice of 1-bit black and white pixel art for World of Horror is genius, since this horror roguelite RPG pays tribute to Junji Ito and does look like a manga, where if anyone tells you that pixel art is not scary, point them to this game to get some brown underpants. Remember when I said at the start that it's about visuals and not gameplay? The Unliving is one such example, where this action strategy roguelite Pikmin-like in which you play as a necromancer looks awesome, but even after the 1.0 release, there were still complaints of poor enemy AI, with units just standing there, where I don't know if it will be fixed or improved. Here's a unique pixel art title in Back to the Dawn, a prison life simulation RPG in which you play as a framed journalist, with the anthropomorphic animals and the power structure of the prison being interesting factors. The pixel art tactical RPG The Iron Oath looked to combine Darkest Dungeon and Battle Brothers, but falls a little short of achieving their goals, but the pixel art made me look and is still of note. The roguelite auto-battler Racine has you placing down cards in real time to power up our protagonist, having a minimalist but effective look. One of the best looking pixel art games of the year is Tsunabi, one that is set in a cyberpunk city and has some amazing details, not to mention impressive gen bosses and backgrounds as well. Come on now, Zzz simply looks great, a 2D precision platformer with quite the amount of challenge, and while nothing crazy in terms of innovation, is simply well executed. Another game that might be quite the contradiction is Astro Ascent, since this looks amazing in cutscenes, portraits and backgrounds, but there's a little bit of an unfinished or blobby look to the characters during gameplay, which is an intentional choice since this has reached version 1.0, so perhaps there's some reason such as not to distract from the action, but I know that this developer can make fantastic pixel art, so I wanted to give them a shout out.
Out of my way!
Vampire Survivors clones are a dime a dozen, but add amazing pixel art and you have a better chance of standing out, which is the case with Death Must Die, one that adds in elements of Diablo to the very popular subgenre and has paid off for them. Like Sea of Stars, The Last Faith was high up on my list of upcoming pixel art titles since this Bloodborne-like 2D Metroidvania looked fantastic even before its Kickstarter campaign, which has been translated into the final product, with it having some brutal execution animations just like Blasphemous. A relatively new release that has been doing well is Small Saga, a turn-based RPG in which you play as mice building everyday objects, being set under the streets of London, and is a whimsical, good time. The surprise release of Crossblitz caught me off guard, but this roguelite deck builder, thankfully, is not another Slay the Spire clone, but rather takes inspiration from Magic the Gathering instead, in which developer Taco Boy Studios is known for their pixel art, so let's hope they will be able to address the mixed reviews through early access. Surprise! Here's a release that I've not covered on the channel in Fury Demake the Chain, a free 8-bit boss battler that translates the first boss fight from that game into 2D and is worth checking out. One of the most amazing Metroidvanias of the year is Tevi, where don't let the bunny girl fool you. There's much more to this game, filled with secrets, challenging bullet hell boss fights, a ton of customization options for combat, and even full Japanese voice acting, and is a must play in my opinion.
私の耳がどうかした?
December releases are rightfully thin, so the only representative from there is Feyland, a Zelda 2 style adventure RPG that looks awesome, where the developers kind of went radio silent after its Kickstarter campaign, but then it came back to life, although it is an early access release with only about 30% of the final content, but it's good to see something from the team, and if you loved these games, watch this video to see what else is coming up in 2024.